Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. The Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 19th of November 2023. And actually, I'm going to do a separate video to my Geopolitics one, not because for any other reason actually, then I'm going to do a little bit of analysis on Bulgaria in this particular military aid segment. And I think that will extend it to meaning the whole video would be too long. So I'm going to split this off from the Geopolitics one. Hopefully you don't mind that. Right. Let's look first of all at the North Korean situation with regard to providing military equipment, ammunition for the Russian army here. And this is an idea that has been touted a number of times. The idea is that although Russia might be receiving, and there are different claims here, 1 million shells, 2 million shells from the North Koreans, it could be that the shells aren't of the best quality. Well, in fact, there's now starting to be data coming back. As Tendai here says, when news broke out that North Korea was delivering 1 million artillery shells to Russia, my first thought was how good the artillery would be of those shells. We have the first statements relating to these questions, and the answer is that they are of poor quality. In some cases, the dimensions of the munitions were so much off the acceptable levels that it led to the explosion of the barrel. And this is actually from Ukraine, the latest. So let's listen to the Ukraine, the latest here.
At a rate they're able to...
So we'll go back and hopefully you can hear this fine.
At a rate they're able to sustain. So tempo is lower. There is a reduced tempo of firing, but Ukraine is said to have enough 155mm ammunition to support the operations it chooses to for now, and the same for Russia, 152mm that they use. Another Western official told me earlier this week that that large supply, thought to be about 1 million artillery shells from North Korea to Russia, hasn't worked out exactly as hoped. The quantity is there, but the quality is questionable. Some manufacturing tolerances in those rounds are thought to be a bit dodgy. The quality control not been as it should be. Some rounds have not been fitting the barrels exactly, and they only need a slight gap, a tiny little gap between the round and the barrel for some of the gases, the explosive charge when the thing fires. If those gases escape around the side of the shell instead of just going all behind it and pushing it out for 20, 30 kilometers, what have you, if some of the gases escape around the side of the shell, it can then just cause the barrel to split. The whole thing just blows up like a sort of cartoon comedy cigar type thing. That has been happening. Some Russian barrels have been splitting and bursting, thought to be because of the some of the poor quality of the shells they've been getting from North Korea.
So that is from North Korea. Sorry, I just cut it off at the very end there. So that is, I think, a significant finding. I don't know how widespread those issues are with the ammunition, but it is confirming some of the early worries some people had, or at least maybe even the early hopes some people had in terms of that North Korean ammunition. This then brings me on to something else, and this is a Trentelenko thread. Now, there are some caveats I think that should be applied to this. So this might only be completely anecdotal, and it might have no... I guess, grounds for being extrapolated across onto all of the stuff received from North Korea. But he says, Trentelenko says, oh boy, the manifold Russian forces, armed forces artillery supply chain logistical failures shown in the David D post and Telegram video. It's time for us to visit the myth of the Russian artillery ammocopia, North Korean edition. So this is due to the claim that, and this came out a few days ago, that the Russians here are using a North Korean artillery piece, a howitzer, whose tires were completely degraded, rotted away, and therefore has been delivered to Russia with rotted tires and would have had to have been dragged into place. And actually, the guy is ramming that with a stick here as well. I mean, there's so much wrong with this image and the video that goes along with it. So again, is this indicative of all the stuff that Russia have received? I don't know. But anyway, let's see what Telenka has to say. Let's start with the fact that we're looking at North Korean D-20 152mm howitzer with dry rotted to nothing wheels using North Korean 152mm ammo. So that ammo we've already heard is not great, or at least some of it isn't great. This underlies four things true in every war. 1, there are never enough artillery shells. So many people say this. 2, there are never enough tyres. Trentelenko's pet peeve. 3, there are never enough barrel liners. 4, there is never enough production capability for new gun barrels. And I think that's pretty sound. Those are pretty sound claims. And one thing that is true in this war, and that no one noticed for 80 years, is that in this war that no one noticed for 80 years, the lack of mechanized logistics in the form of pallets and forklifts in the Russian army. This is something Trentelenko has talked about a lot previously, that when you see trucks full of supplies, Russian trucks full of supplies, they aren't loaded onto pallets and then kind of wrapped up so that you can get them all off in one with a forklift truck and put them somewhere else. In the trucks and in the railways, in the railway carriages, the equipment is just loaded on by hand in very heavy boxes, kind of like almost sort of haphazardly, or at least stacked by hand. This is incredibly labor intensive and is not efficient. And the lack of pallets and the lack of palletized equipment movement is a massive hindrance to the Russian logistics efficiency. It's just incredible. Anyway, I won't go down that rabbit hole. Nonetheless, he says the amount of brute, back-breaking manual labour to place a D-20 howitzer without tyres into that firing position beggars the imagination. And here's the thing. You can't move the puppy outside its mount firing azimuth without vehicles dragging the thing. So you put this thing in place, and then to move it, you have to get a vehicle to literally drag it. So you can't move this howitzer. You can only adjust its elevation of the barrel, so it can really only fire in one straight line. Without, you can move it, but it requires having a vehicle right next to it to keep moving it. It's just incredibly inefficient and problematic. Now, is it, as I've asked before, is it indicative? Is it representative of many or all of the North Korean artillery pieces given to Russia or bought by Russia? Good luck with that now in the mud season, he says, shooting into Ukrainian counter-battery radar coverage and under Ukrainian 25-kilometer range first-person view drones. I've done a couple of 2022 threads on the logistical problems of Russian artillery have, particularly with barrel life. These D-20s had at best 1,500 equivalent full charge rounds, EFC, of barrel life brand new. So these things can fire 1,500 rounds, and then you need to do something with the barrel. And more likely 1,000 with a range of 2/3 of an M777 towed gun. So not only do they not have very good range, but their barrels don't last as long. And this D-20 is not new, so it won't have 1,500 rounds from new barrel life. No one knows how many shells the Russian armed forces or the North Korean front line or reserve barrels had through them before the latest Russian invasion of Ukraine kicked off. Older M777 and newer Russian guns last 2,000 rounds. According to the Perun YouTube channel, older Soviet guns like the D-20 last from 1,000 to 1,500, and the newest Russian guns have corruption problems as well. Russia lacks production foundries of the necessary grades of high-strength steel for gun barrel liners. Nadim Brzezinski's July the 17th, 2022 article, Logistics Collapse, goes deeply into the corruption and Russian artillery barrel liner metallurgy. Shooting poor dimensional quality North Korean artillery shells through 65 to 75-year-old barrels of doubtful lifespan and serviceability is a violently explosive way to commit lethal self-harm. Nor is that the only place we see corruption. Russian tire corruption exists. If the Russians had had any tires to replace the ones rotted off this D-20, they would have been on that gun to increase its combat capability and reduce the manual labor. But the Russian armed forces don't have those tires, so they can't do that. Russian armed forces haven't used D-20 152mm guns for 3 decades. There isn't any production capability for the tires to replace them, and the Soviet Union sold most of the D-20s they had in reserve in the 1980s to the Iraqis in the Iran-Iraq war, with yellow highlighting this document from the US Marine Corps, Lessons Learned Iran-Iraq War Volume 1, details the masses of late 1940s to 60s guns pawned off on the Iraqis to kill Iranian militia. Ukraine's new 155mm, 39 caliber and 52 caliber guns coming from Europe can sit at 22 kilometers and eat D-20s right out of their immobile positions. But why should Ukraine bother with first-person view drones can do the job and avoid shell hunger in the first place? So I've talked often about how drones are now counter-battery fire for artillery pieces. You don't need to hit them with your own artillery. You can save that artillery to do work elsewhere and let the drones at a cheaper cost to the Ukrainian armed forces can hit than, say, an Excalibur round particularly, but to the very valuable artillery shells that are in short supply. It's much better to use FPV drones to do that job. Ukraine can save its Turkish and US D-Pick'ems, so the cluster munition rounds, and its artillery barrel life to kill Russian infantry, and to use limited 155mm barrel life to fire D-Pick'ems to kill Russian vehicles assaulting Ukrainian positions. It shows videos to support that. And Twitter accounts pooping their trousers about Ukraine being buried by huge numbers of North Korean D-20 guns firing shells really need to take a chill pill. Russia is having to put more and more effort into using scarce foreign exchange to achieve less and less military results. Putin's regime started the war with $650 billion. It lost $325 billion in frozen overseas assets to sanctions. It blew another $150 billion propping up the ruble, and of the $175 billion left, $120 billion went to military spending so far. Nominally, Putin's state bank has $60 billion left over from the original $650 billion, plus whatever the state has from sanctioned oil and has stolen from private firms. And Putin is buying D-20 guns with dry rotted tires and poor dimensional quality shells from North Korea with that money. There is another name for Russia having to do more effort to achieve less military capabilities, called the Lanchester Square Law collapse. It's a trend from Mr. S guns to towed D-20s, Kamaz tactical trucks to UAZ or loaf Scooby-Doo vans. And that's reflective of this kind of increasing collapse of Russian equipment and logistics, so on and so forth. Now, all the caveats need to be applied to this. That could just be one gun out of all the guns, one howitzer out of all of them that just doesn't have tires. Well, whoop-de-doo. Let's use it anyway. Or it could represent an issue endemic with the North Korean equipment being given to Russia, or bought by Russia. So, we need to be careful. But all is not well. You start piecing all these bits together and you think, yeah, Russia are, in some ways, I think Russia are just hanging on tenuously to this position they have in the war. Yes, they're at a point where they're shifting momentum in several places. The question is, well, how far can they go with that? Like, what are the troops like when they are having to send as you saw in my last video, someone that's been mobilized 2 weeks ago in Berdyansk is on the front line, when they've got 20 deserters running away in Krinky, when they've got issues with counter-battery fire they keep moaning about, electronic warfare is taking a toll in certain places, when they're having to go to North Korea to get ammunition and howitzers. What does this say about their ability to maintain their status in this war? Very interesting. I don't want to be overly positive because, you end up several months later going, well, okay, maybe that didn't happen. But, you're hoping that all these things come together to eventually bring about some kind of Russian capitulation. Okay, now I'm going to go on to Bulgaria. So really, the only kind of news pieces I had were centered around Bulgaria and the North Korean ammunition. So let's look at Bulgaria. This is from the Kyiv Independent. There's two articles I want to talk to you about: Bulgaria and Kyiv Independent and the Financial Times. They both came out pretty much around the same time. So let's give you some context. A new coalition government elected in June in Bulgaria after 2 years of political deadlock is now shifting Bulgaria towards Kyiv and the West. Sofia, that's the capital, has been quietly shipping ammunition to Kyiv since 2022, but the most recent pledge of 100 armoured vehicles, so those are old APCs, was the first package to be announced publicly. Supporting Ukraine is in Bulgaria's strategic interest for several reasons. Bulgarian Defense Minister Todor Tagarev said in an interview with Kyiv Independent, Russia, quote, broke all international norms and is, quote, destroying the international security architecture. Quote, first, this is a moral obligation to help the victim of aggression, he said, but it is also in our strategic interest that Ukraine withholds the Russian aggression and manages to recover its sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is key for the stability in Europe, particularly for Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region. Right. It's really worth noting here, and this goes back to people in America who are shouting about, and other places, who are shouting about, well, why should we aid Ukraine? You know, why are we spending our tax dollars? Why? We should be isolationist and not bother. The US and here Bulgaria are not helping Ukraine primarily for moral reasons. That is part of the equation. As you can see here, it says, Tagarev here says, first, this is a moral obligation to help the victim of aggression. I would argue that's him saying that as a kind of PR thing. But that's not really why, well, that is not primarily why Bulgaria are supporting Ukraine. It's actually in their strategic interest to do so, in the same way that the US is giving all the aid that they are giving, and the EU and Britain and all these nations, is not because it's the moral right thing to do. It's partly part of it. That helps, right? It helps to lubricate those chains of assistance. But really, it's in the strategic interest of the nations to do so. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't strategically important. They wouldn't be just stripping their cupboards bare of stuff to throw at Ukraine in the case of the UK, right? If it wasn't massively in our strategic interest to do so. You can talk about morality, but what's really going on is strategic interest, and he says that here. But it is also in it. I would say that he's flipped that for PR. It's mainly in their strategic interest, but it's a moral obligation. But he says it's also in our strategic interest that Ukraine withholds the Russian aggression and manages to recover its sovereignty and territorial integrity. So this is why Hungary and Slovakia have different approaches, because their strategy, their international strategy, dictates that it's not in their strategic interest to support Ukraine militarily, right? Now, it turns out that things like Hungary are allowing the EU. This is what is not announced. This is interesting stuff. Like Hungary's talking out of both sides of its mouth as well as places like Turkey. It turns out that Hungary is allowing EU, US, and NATO weaponry to be delivered through Hungary to Ukraine. So it's saying all this stuff out here in public so that Putin is appeased. But underneath that, they're also allowing NATO, because it's a NATO country, Bulgaria, and it realizes it's in its strategic interest to say, okay, you can do this, but publicly we're going to say this, and we're not going to directly sell arms to, you'll give arms to Ukraine. So that's in our strategic interest to appease Russia, but also we need to keep NATO happy because we're in NATO. And so this is happening as well. So it's just understanding that the very little of this is about morality, although it is for you and I, right? But for governments, it's less about morality and more about strategy. And when it comes to naysayers like those Republican politicians, this needs to be communicated. It's not just about, we're not a charity case, and it's not a zero-sum game where we're stripping stuff from hospitals to give guns to Ukraine. It's like, this is a long-term strategy, and you need to understand that, and you need to understand it's also supporting jobs at home and raising tax revenue as well. Anyway, but it would be tough to disentangle from Russia, this is going back to Bulgaria, whose propaganda is influential in Bulgarian politics and among the public. The sitting president, Rumen Radev, is pro-Russian. So the president, rather like other countries like Czechia and other places, is less important in terms of what goes on a daily basis in the government. It's more of a kind of a seat without the power, I guess. Tagarev said that there are politicians who oppose giving weapons to Ukraine, claiming that they're trying to achieve peace faster, even though this argument makes no sense. Bulgaria is also heavily dependent on Russian oil, and that's worth knowing. Bulgaria is a good friend to have with its abundant Soviet weapons stockpiles and larger defense industry. In his first public visit to Bulgaria in July, President Zelensky scolded Radev, so the president, for his opposition to arming Ukraine for what he described as a conflict. Radev struck back in July, telling journalists that Kiev, quote, insists on waging war while Europe pays for everything. The Ukrainian embassy in Sofia pounced on the comment, calling Radev out for repeating Russian propaganda. Bulgarian Prime Minister Nikolai Denkov also rebuked it. So you've got the Prime Minister saying the president in Bulgaria is not on, saying it doesn't reflect the position of the EU and NATO. Bulgaria is a member of both. Tagarev said the president's remarks won't affect support from Bulgaria, which is parliamentary republic. That means the government is in charge of defense, security and foreign policy, not the president. And it goes on to talk about the importance of Bulgaria in terms of being on the Black Sea and facilitating the grain corridor, about their own army being modernized. And then we go on to the defense military industrial complex in Bulgaria. When asked about Bulgaria's plans for how it plans to supply its Soviet-era weapons to Ukraine, the defense minister said, "We are doing what's possible, mainly supplying from its own defense industry, traditionally specialized in small arms like weapons and ammunition. As government policy, we provide opportunities for companies to sell, and it's up to the companies to sign contracts, find ways to deliver the products to Ukraine," said the minister, adding that the most defense companies in Bulgaria are privately owned. Tagarev said that Bulgaria's industrial production and exports doubled or tripled last year for $1 billion or more euros. He hinted that, quote, the assumption is that in large part that is due to the export of ammunition and material from Bulgarian companies. According to a Guardian report citing Bulgarian officials, Sofia supplied 30% of Ukraine's Soviet ammo needs last spring after Foreign Minister Kuleba visited in secret. The defense industry, quote, the defense industry is working 24/7 and that's the most important support that Ukraine gets, Tagra said. These different claims that back in the first part of the war, that Bulgaria basically propped up not only ammunition and equipment support, military support for Ukraine, propped up Ukraine with that, but also with fuel, I think, as well, for their military defense. So Bulgaria was massively important and still remains so. Maybe increasingly so because this is a source of Soviet-era ammunition. So the FT, Financial Times, also reports Russian hitmen and saboteurs are targeting Bulgaria's arms industry. So Bulgarian's arms magnate, who survived 2 Russian assassination attempts, has raised the alarm bell about sabotage campaign that he says Moscow has been waging for years as it tries to disrupt crucial weapons supplies to Ukraine. Emilian Gebrev, whose company MQ produces much of the Bulgarian output of Soviet standard bullets and tank shells shipped to Kiev, told the Financial Times that Russian saboteurs had actively targeted his factories and depots, including after Russian President Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. Quote, the Russian threats mean a new set of measures should be undertaken at a national level as well as the level of the alliance, he wrote in emailed answers to questions. He was referring to NATO, of which Bulgaria has been a member since 2004. The arms manufacturer said Russian military intelligence, or GRU, operatives have tried to kill him twice in 2015, quote, obviously acted on orders from a very high level in Moscow, but it said it remained unclear why Russia, quote, would use subversive methods on defense-related sites and against individual lives on NATO and EU soil. No Russian operatives were captured or prosecuted in connection with his poisonings and the explosions at his company's sites, a failure that Gebrev blamed on Moscow's ongoing influence over Bulgarian's government. Russian meddling, which also extends to political parties and the media, threatens Bulgaria's growing ambition to increase production of Soviet-era weapons and ammunition used by Ukraine and clients around the developing world, according to analysts and government officials. So we've heard also of the arms company Arsenal, or the Arsenal production facility in Bulgaria. There being explosions actually since February 2022. So GUR tried to blow up, physically destroy Bulgarian defense factories and facilities. Bulgarian prosecutors, it says later, investigated 3 GRU agents suspected of having handled the nerve agent, this is trying to kill Gebrev, and charged him with attempted murder. But in 2020, the proceedings were suspended, with the authorities citing stalled progress and a lack of international legal assistance. Experts have pointed out that MQ is one of just a few companies making Soviet standard 125mm tank shells outside of Russia, which Ukrainian forces still use for their old fleet of tanks. Such specific capabilities may be among the reasons why the Bulgarian manufacturer is the target of sabotage attempts. Quote, Russians are very interested in our facilities and the people manning them, said a Bulgarian official who requested anonymity. The question is how Bulgarian authorities can protect the industry and individuals, owners of the industry. Botched investigations, destroyed evidence. This is a problem. Who investigates the prosecutors? MQ was first targeted in 2011 when an explosion hit one of its depots in central Bulgaria. Gebrev said that this was the first act of sabotage against his factories, a claim that is not confirmed by an official investigation. Other blasts happened over the years, including an explosion in 2022 and a large fire this year in the MQ facility at Karnabat in eastern Bulgaria. Similar incidents had occurred also at other weapons manufacturers, that's what I was just talking about, without authorities investigating the circumstances, he said. Quote, there's been no result whatsoever in any of more than a dozen cases involving Russian terrorist acts and spy networking in Bulgaria, Gebrev said. All the investigations have been either stopped or stalled, and none has been brought to court. Corruption among Bulgarian prosecutors and a lack of investigations into their criminal behaviour have featured prominently in reports by the European Commission. Prosecutorial impunity and Russia's continued influence are also among the reasons cited by several EU capitals for blocking Bulgaria's accession to the border-free Schengen area. In other words, Bulgaria is not entitled to free movement of people within the EU because of these issues and connections to Russia. So if you allow Bulgaria to have free access to free movement of people to the Schengen area, then that will get a lot of potential pro-Russian Bulgarian spies and entities moving freely in Europe, and that would threaten Europe's security. So that's a really genuine worry. Under a recently elected pro-Western government in Sofia that has pledged to curb Russian influence, the chief prosecutor was forced out in June, and a justice reform has made it harder for corruption and organised crime cases to be dropped. Gebrev said this was a start, but a lot remained to be done. Quote, the prosecution of the previous leadership of the National Security Service, or DANS, were involved in a systematic and massive cover-up of the sabotage acts by Russian operatives, including the explosions in our storage sites and the Novichok poisoning attempt, he said. DANS said it had, quote, undertaken a number of measures to limit Russian influence recently and uncovered, quote, an unprecedented number of cases of Russian malign espionage activity. However, this is all ongoing, and they need to obviously have these reforms in place to make sure that people are held to account within Bulgaria and the Russians. Bulgarian officials estimate, it goes on later to say, that as much as 40% of the bullets and shells used by Ukraine in its war against Russia are manufactured in Bulgaria. So now this is up from 30% of the kind of Russian era stuff to 40% of all bullets and shells. In addition to direct shipments to Kyiv, a lot goes to countries that have sent their stocks to Ukraine. So the idea is it's not just about the direct giving of stuff to Ukraine, but it's about the backfilling that Bulgaria is partly responsible for to allied nations when they give their own kit to Ukraine. So you could say the backfilling is itself indirect ammunition production for Ukraine. And that's why you can take that number up to 40%. So we backfill for allies. Tagra said, directly and indirectly, well over half of our output goes to Ukraine. Some 5% of the country's GDP, their gross domestic product, stems from arms sales. So Bulgarian arms industry is massive for Bulgaria, according to government officials. Most of the business is conducted by private companies such as MQ and Arsenal, that's the one I talked about previously, which are now seeking to expand production to NATO standard equipment. Really interesting stuff. So I thought I would do a bit of an analysis of that, read from those articles, because I think it's really important to understand the place that Bulgaria plays in supporting Ukraine, but also the place it has inside the EU and inside NATO. Really, really significant. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is this really important video by Pekka Kalianiemi. He's interviewing Kate McKenna, who is working voluntarily, trying to join the dots and get often obsolete equipment, obsolete for particular countries, but not obsolete for Ukraine, really useful for Ukraine, or other types of equipment, get that from these countries to Ukraine, and she's becoming like a bit of a go-between and a really important person. Now, I'm going to dip into several parts of this interview because obviously I don't just want to play the whole interview. You need to go and watch it at Soup Central, which is Pekka Kaliniemi's YouTube channel. But anyway, listen to her now. We're going to talk about two bits of equipment. First, a type of gun, and then MQ-9 Reaper drones.
And the other thing is that through a network of amazing people, I often get told of retired systems that Ukraine could use. And so we're working currently on getting the CRAMs, which are a railgun, but basically it's the last point of hope. These guns used to be on frigates, so it's like a smaller warship. Canada has 12 of them. And so we're going to try and get those to protect the power stations and other infrastructure. It's pretty typical of what I search for.
So these would be capable of defending the power stations against like Shahed drones
and missiles. So their purpose on a boat is to literally take down missiles. They're very, very effective. The other thing is the ammunition that they fire disintegrates in the air. So we can use them in civilian populations without having to worry about the impacts on civilians. It sends up basically a wall of ammo and nothing can get through it. So we're hoping to get those as soon as we can, really.
Okay. As of to.
So that's really interesting. So that would be fantastic. These kind of things that become obsolete, or they're on a frigate and that frigate's been decommissioned or whatever. So what are we going to do with these guns that would have been protecting a frigate from missiles and whatever? Well, let's get those guns, put them on a rail system or something, and have them near energy plants or whatever. Power stations, energy plants, power stations, words. Put them near power stations, and then we've got 12 guns that can now just fire walls of ammo into the air and take out anything that comes near. I mean, brilliant. Why not? And for her to be doing this is almost heroic. It's like dedicating your life to doing stuff like this is awesome. Why aren't Ukrainian politicians doing this and Ukrainian people doing this? And obviously they're involved in this. Like, there is one question, and why aren't say the Canadian government officials involved in this, thinking, well, we've got these guns, what should we do with them? Would Ukraine need them? Stuff like this. It's just annoying that it has to be done in this kind of way, but brilliant that someone is actually doing that. And that kind of frustration is much more prevalent in her next topic of MQ-9 Reaper drones. Okay, so the next part concerns General Atomics, who make the MQ-9 Reaper drone, a famous drone that you see that's in films that you know a lot about. So this is a tried and tested, decent bit of kit. And I reported ages ago that the company was wanting to basically sell, General Atomics was wanting to sell 2 of these for $1 to Ukraine. I don't know at the time originally whether then Ukraine would have to pay for like the upkeep and whatever that costs 10 million. I mean, the question is, why would you give something completely for free and blah blah blah? So there would be some kind of benefit going forward, but it could have also just been a big advertising thing for them, a bit like the Bayraktar drones, right? So it's like, if these work really well, I think the intention was the guy who's in charge of General Atomics wanted to see this thing responsible for sending missile to blow up the Kerch Bridge, and then obviously everyone would be like, oh, I want a piece of that. Anyway, listen to what she has to say about this.
General Atomics, who make the Reaper, would like to send 2 aircraft to Ukraine to prove the concept, to prove that they can operate, but not only operate, but provide value in this theater of war. And they are very, very, very confident that this will be successful. When I got involved in April, it was really to try to figure out where the logjams were. At that time, sustainment cost was an issue. Sustainment cost for 2 aircraft for a year is about $10 million US. So that took a bit, but General Atomics owner is willing to pay that. So that's now no longer an issue. So Ukraine can have 2 Reapers for $1 with no costs whatsoever. And that includes training in California. That means seeing everything, they have a 31-day training program. And so I can't remember maybe you can help me out with this. I think it was 75 days. If we say go today, we can have them in 75 days in Ukraine. So that's kind of exciting.
But there's also discussion over,
And the question is then, well, why the bloody hell not is that not happening?
like using it. Reaper is a big drone, right? It's huge. So I mean, there's a counter argument that this type of big drones, they are useless in the fronts, and this kind of, is it like that? Is it so, or is it?
It isn't. And to be honest, that is a message that is about a year and a half old. 18 months ago, that was the argument against the Reaper going to Ukraine. That has been answered repeatedly, categorically. No, this is a very, very important asset for Ukraine to have. They are survivable. They are fantastic in terms of their strike capacity, and we should have them. I mean, we really, really do need to have them. The F-16s are great, but as somebody described them this morning, they're an airborne sniper. That's all they are. They're not some magical pill here, and they have one purpose. So if you imagine a sniper in the air, that's what the F-16s deliver, air to air. What the MQ-9s, the Reapers, give us is the ability to go after HVTs, high-value targets in Russia, and also to take out some of the equipment that's causing us much difficulty. They can provide queuing. Queuing is where they can provide the exact precision targets because of their ISR capabilities to F-16s. They can say, hey, this is the jet that's coming through. This is where you want to go, whatever. But it can also take out, its weapon delivery systems are amazing.
Okay. But I think there's another interesting aspect or important aspect that we didn't mention yet, is that in case one of these Reapers is shot down, there's no it doesn't involve any people. So they are unmanned vehicles operated from somewhere else, like a remote location. So it's also a safety thing for the soldiers. And,
yeah. Well, and very importantly, it's a safety thing for our pilots. Our F-16 pilots are going to be invaluable. I mean, they're life, and we need to value life anyway.
It's a really good point. So, use these rather than put F-16 pilots in harm's way.
But in terms of their training and their value to Ukraine is enormous. So instead of putting an F-16 pilot or another pilot on another aircraft in danger, the MQ-9s can go in. And here's the thing. If we prove the concept with these two aircraft that we can have for $1, the US has 100 in warehouses. Britain is retiring their MQ-9 Block A's. They've got, I think it's 25. So we have a store. We can have a long-term, sustainable MQ-9.
I just don't understand why this hasn't been just green-lighted straight away. Just like, yeah, obviously. Yeah, let's do it.
Within Ukraine. And it will be extremely advantageous to have that. I don't really understand why they're not here already.
So,
I mean, the issue might be air defense capabilities of the Russians, but as that is getting degraded over time...
If we crowdfund $50, we can get 100 Reapers for Ukraine, basically. Okay, but yeah, this sounds like almost too good to be true.
And this is a good question now.
Reapers in the skies of Ukraine at the
moment?
Why
they're not there?
So,
why they're not there?
I have managed to negotiate with the team. We've knocked off every single thing that was a barrier: the sustainment, the training, the transport, the spare parts, the setting up of the operations within Ukraine, the identification of all of the airfields we can use, all of those things, the CONOPS. I've been working with DIA or GUR on this, and they have been amazing. And MSPO, which is the Polish defense, all of the defense divisions for Ukraine were represented meeting GA. That was a show of unity and a desire to get these aircraft. So I don't understand. I mean, I don't understand why President Zelensky is not going in front of the TVs and saying, we need these MQ-9s, get them over here now.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if you look at these packages that the United States is sending to Ukraine, it would be $1 of the whole package, the price there. So it wouldn't reduce any other aid. So it's to me, it doesn't make sense.
It isn't.
Positive sum game. I mean, just, why not? Anyway, go to Pekka Kaljuniemi's Twitter handle and spread. He's got this video and a shorter version of it. Spread that word. And if you can contact Kate McKenna, I'd love to get her on and chat to her about this. I thought this was really interesting. In fact, all of these topics I find really interesting, like the North Korean ammo, Bulgaria, and this stuff. So that's why I thought I'd do a separate video. I hope you got something out of it. It's now been 40 minutes, so I need to stop talking. Take care and speak to you soon. Please remember, the ways to support are buy me a coffee in the description below. There's PayPal, there's YouTube membership. Thanks so much to my members and all that stuff. But for all those who do all that, thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Speak soon.